Veterans of war, what was it like to come home? I'd been deployed in Afghanistan, and when I finally came home, walking through the arrival gates, I expected to see my girlfriend Abigail waiting for me. But she wasn't there. I grabbed a cab to her apartment, and as soon as I walked in, I heard her crying in the bathroom. My heart sank. I knocked on the door, and when she finally opened it, she was standing there holding a positive pregnancy test, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, my heart dropped like never before. I couldn't find the words, and all the while, Abigail was begging me to say something, anything. The first thing that finally came out of my mouth was, "How far along?" She answered, sounding guilty, "1 month." Hearing those words felt like a punch straight to my gut. All I could think about was where I was a month ago, deep in Kabul, fighting for my life, watching my brothers fall around me, wondering if I was next. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of Abigail. I saw her face in the stars at night, heard her voice telling me I could make it through. I pictured her standing at my funeral, crying her heart out. I pushed through the hell of war for her. And while I was out there, clinging to thoughts of her, she was with another man, without protection. The image of that made my blood boil. Rage, betrayal, and heartbreak hit me like a tidal wave. I asked who the father was, and when she whispered a name I didn't recognize, I lost it. I couldn't even process what was happening around me. All I could see was red. How could the same woman who talked about spending our lives together be pregnant by another man? The thought alone sent me into a fury. I yelled at the top of my lungs, my voice echoing through the apartment. Abigail tried to explain, but I wasn't having it. I stormed out of the bathroom and slammed the door behind me so hard the wood split like it had been struck by lightning. Her scream echoed through the apartment as I stormed into the living room, flipping the coffee table in a blind rage. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound deafening in the silence that followed. All I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal, and the bitter taste of the life I thought I knew crumbling around me. I punched a hole in the TV mounted above and it fell to the floor. My hands were red from the wounds. I realized what was happening and I tried to calm myself down. I couldn't do this anymore. I didn't want to hurt Abigail, and I knew that I never would, but I was in so much rage I had no idea what I was capable of, and so I left. The next day I came back to the wreck of an apartment and Abigail wasn't there. The only thing that was there was a note from her, on top of what was the coffee table. She said she was leaving, and she feared for her life the night before. I understood, but I knew that I would never put my hands on Abigail. If this is what she wanted for us, I would respect her decision. I only wanted to see her happy. After all we've been through together, I never thought it would end like this. She was truly my everything and gave my life meaning. Abigail was the only one there for me when my parents and brother passed away tragically in a car accident. I had lost all my family in one night, but Abigail was there. She helped me pick up the broken pieces of my heart and sewed them back together. She was there for me when I would wake up from nightmares about my past, and I thought that we were only right for one another. I've always adorned Abigail ever since we were 18. We were fresh out of high school and were planning on going to the same college. Everything was fine until her parents went through her phone and found out she was bi. They told her it was against their religion and that they couldn't have a daughter in their house who had demons working in her. They decided to kick her out, and she had nowhere to go. We were young and broke, and we couldn't stay with my parents because the college we were going to was out of state. So I sold everything I had to build up savings for us. We packed up her things and I got a job to provide for us. That is how I ended up in the military. Now all I had left of her was this note. Everything in our lives had been scattered away. All because she decided that getting into bed with some man was worth so much more than everything we have ever built together. She left behind everything we had for him. The realization made my heart ache. I walked into the bathroom and turned the knob on the broken door. The knob and half of the door broke off into my hand as I tried to pull on it. I sighed and looked in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and bags hung underneath. I left the apartment and went to the liquor store. Days turned into weeks and I could feel myself losing control over my life. I spiraled into a dark abyss. The PTSD I'd fought so hard to control took over and I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. Abigail had been my lifeline, and now she was gone. She was the only stability I'd known. It was my best friend Mark who found me one night in a dingy bar. We had served together in the military and grown close. He didn't say a word when he saw the state I was in, the empty bottles, the mess. He simply hauled me to my feet and took me to his place. I resisted at first, but Mark stayed by my side. He didn't lecture me or anything like that. He just stayed there with me until I could sober up a bit. The withdrawal was brutal. My body jerked and trembled at night. I would often wake up in cold sweats. I craved the numbness I felt when I drank. I was tired of having to deal with my emotions. With Mark's help, I started to piece my life back together. It wasn't easy and every day was a struggle. The cravings didn't disappear. The pain didn't magically go away. I learned how to manage my PTSD better, but I found a glimmer of hope in the routine. Months passed and I was starting to feel like myself again. I went to the mall on a Saturday. As I approached the shoe store, I saw a familiar figure out of the corner of my eye. I almost didn't believe it at first, but there she was, Abigail. She was standing outside a baby clothing store holding the hand of a man who could only be the father of her child. The man she had chosen over me. It had been months since I'd seen her, and the shock of her appearance hit me like a punch to the gut. Abigail looked awful. The vibrant woman I had loved was nowhere to be seen. Her hair, once so beautifully kept, hung limply around her face. Dark circles were around her hollow eyes. Her shoulders slumped and her clothes seemed to hang off her. The man beside her, who I assumed was the father of her child, looked impatient. His grip on her hand firm and possessive. He was tall with a stern expression. His gaze focused elsewhere, seemingly oblivious to Abigail's apparent distress. As they moved through the crowd, he walked a step ahead, pulling her along rather than walking beside her. I stood there, stuck in that spot, my heart aching at the sight. Seeing her like this stirred something deep within me. She wasn't happy. She was suffering, just as I had. The man glanced back at her. He looked irritated, and I couldn't help but feel angry. Our eyes met briefly. For a moment, Abigail seemed happy to see me. She quickly looked away, however, her hand tightening around the man's, but not before I saw the silent plea in her eyes. Her look spoke volumes. I watched them disappear into the crowd. As I made my way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that our paths had crossed for a reason. I felt like this was another opportunity to help me to show my love for her. It hurt me to see her like this, and I knew I could make it better. That night, I went for a run. After I got back, I saw her name light up on my phone. She texted me. My heart raced as I opened it. I was shocked, but felt a tingle of joy that I hadn't misread her eyes at the mall earlier that day. She sent a long text expressing how sorry she was for cheating on me and how she wished she never had this guy's baby or married him. I told her that I forgave her and she asked if we could meet up later that week. I agreed. A couple of days went by and we met at a quiet cafe, and as soon as she saw me, she burst into tears. She told me about how he treats her and how she thought she was doing the right thing by not forcing me to be the father of someone else's child, but ended up trapped in a nightmare. She had been my world, and seeing her like this broke my heart all over again. I decided to take care of it, promising her she wouldn't have to suffer anymore. She asked if we could get back together, but I said no. The only reason I agreed to help her was just wanted to prove to her that I still loved her, and that the loyalty we had over the years hadn't died, so I did some digging. I spent hours on social media piecing together fragments of information from Abigail's posts and comments. The man, Darren, wasn't a hard man to find. He had a routine and habits that were easy to trace once you knew what to look for. Public check-ins at the gym, photos tagged at his bar, and even a few work-related posts gave me a roadmap of his daily life. One evening, I parked my car a few blocks away from their house. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. I felt a familiar tension work its way into my muscles. It was the same feeling I'd had on missions that heightened awareness and sharpened my senses. I watched their house from a distance, noting the comings and goings, the lights flicking on and off. Darren left the house around 8 p.m., heading to the gym as he did every Tuesday. I followed at a safe distance. My heart was pounding in my chest. The darkness hid me. He was a creature of habit, sticking to the same route and parking in the same spot. I observed him from my car, hidden in the shadows as he walked into the gym. The gym was a 24-hour place, and it wasn't unusual for people to come and go at all hours. I waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours, until he finally came out. He was sweat-soaked and carrying a gym bag. He didn't notice me as he walked to his car. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I knew this was it. As soon as I was going to attack Darren, a man that seemed to recognize him showed up, and they started talking to one another. I knew I couldn't now because it would be too risky, so I waited in my car until they were done, but before I could get him, he was in his car. The bar was his next stop. I followed him there, parking across the street and watching as he went inside. The neon lights flickered, casting a sickly glow on the pavement. I waited, knowing that alcohol would make him an easier target. Hours passed, and the bar began to empty. It was close to closing time when Darren finally stumbled out, his steps unsteady, and his demeanor was aggressive. I stepped out of my car. I felt my pulse in my throat. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I shadowed him as he made his way to his car, walking as quietly as possible. He didn't see me coming. I grabbed him from behind and dragged him into the alley behind the bar. I caught him off guard and he struggled, but I had the upper hand. I pressed him against the brick wall. I didn't hold back. I let out years of frustration on this dude. When it was over, I walked away, leaving him in a state of mincemeat and not the lean kind. I left that bar feeling accomplished. I was proud of myself. I knew that guy wouldn't be putting his hands on Abigail ever again. Abigail never contacted me again after that, and I didn't seek her out. I'd done what I could for her, and that was enough. I found a strange peace in knowing that the last thing I did for her was protect her, even if it wasn't the kind of protection I'd once dreamed of offering. Life went on. I focused on my recovery, leaning on Mark and the support system I'd built. The nightmares never completely went away, and the pain of losing Abigail was a constant ache, but I learned to live with it. I found new things to live for, and new goals to strive towards. One day, as I was walking through the park, I saw a couple playing with their young child. They were laughing. They seemed like the perfect family. I felt a sense of sadness, but also a bit hopeful. Maybe someday, I'd find that kind of happiness again. For now, I was content with the knowledge that I'd survived. I'd been to hell and back, but I was still standing, and that was enough.